Hello, welcome to And Q. This is the programme where we get a chance to sit down and have a chat with a seasoned expert in the broadcast industry to tell us all about their journey, the highlights, the challenges and the key takeaways. A pleasure to say that today we have with us Jeremy Barr, who has worked in the industry for many decades across channels internationally, domestically, and you have televised some of the key moments in British history as well.
I've been very privileged.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. And I should say you've also taught thousands of students over the years who you've inspired, and you're here to share a bit of that wisdom with us as well.
Thank
so
you.
a very warm welcome to you. Jeremy, there is lots we need to get through over the next hour or so, but we need to start at the very beginning, those early days, because the plan wasn't always media, was it? You wanted to be a naval architect.
Absolutely. I loved ships. I drew ships. I'd grown up partially in Scotland. The shipyards at that time were just bustling with energy, and I thought that's my future should be in that field. But then teacher said, your maths isn't good. In fact, he said something much more dramatic than that. And at the time I thought, no, it can't be. So, but I love ships the way they are. They have personalities.
Yes. So there was always a kind of technical dimension. So how did you make that transition from that desire to want to work as a naval architect to media?
Ships are always doing something in history. So if you learn about ships, sooner or later you learn tales about history. You learn about the extraordinary events in which maybe ships have been useful to humankind. They've done things which others thought were impossible. And also, you start to learn about the cultures of many other parts of the world. Because, of course, that's, I think, a world we're still in, even though people think it's all instant now. I don't think it really is.
Picking up on that word instant, in this day and age, all we have to do is pick up a camera on our phone. We can start experimenting. What were those early days of experimenting with the technicals like for you?
Well, wonderful, because, of course, there's nothing simple at all about, quote, an image orthicon electronic camera. All the technology required people to really understand what was going on in these beasts. And some of them were beasts because a camera in the studio at that time was a lethal object if it fell off a pedestal. So the glory was, from a teaching point of view, when one comes to that, you have so much to learn and to teach. I don't think one person can think, I can do it all, I can make them, it's me. I've always grown up to not like the obsession about ego. I think partially that comes from a parentage, part Scottish, rather severe, part Yorkshire, equally rather severe, but also, thank goodness, there's a bit of Italian there. So make it a bit...
And temper matters.
Temper matters, yes. I say, life can just be fun,
Yeah.
you know.
I should stress, you didn't actually study engineering, did you?
No. My father had been an electrical engineer. No, I studied history and politics. And I'm so glad I did. I mean, the storytelling that sits in history
Yes.
and the storytelling that sits in politics. So very early on, I chose to get involved in politics. And I hope I don't upset anyone by saying, yes, I used to go around and knock on people's doors as a 10-year-old. And yes, I was a conservative. Oh, dreadful. But it was a starting point, and it led me to understand a lot about people, that how people respond to you, whether they just see you as a badge or whether they actually listen to each other. And also I learnt that some people are not quite as appalling as we might be led to believe.
Yeah.
And that's one of the good things I think I learned both working for the Conservative and later for the Labour Party.
So studying politics was central to your understanding of people, both behind the camera and in front of the camera,
Yes.
clearly. How did you then go on to get your first gig in directing, and where was that?
Well, the first directing was not broadcasting at all. It was an industrial film made by the Swiss engineering firm Sulzer. It was about Northwick Park Hospital, which was being built, major project, and it was about the plumbing under the ground.
Okay.
And really, I think probably I got the chance because no one else wanted to do something like, I mean, industrial film, my goodness.
The plumbing underground at Northwick Park Hospital, I mean, was that appealing to you?
It was actually.
Yeah.
Because I had seen, I hope this doesn't sound, I'd seen a magnificent film made by a French director called Alain Resnais about the Bibliothèque Nationale.
Yes.
How he'd made a library, book stacks, so exhilarating, so exciting, so mystical. And in my absurd way, I thought maybe we could have a go with the pipework under the ground. I mean, it wasn't quite that good, I'm afraid, but... and also because you're part of this huge thing, a small team, a massive construction team building this hospital. And what's the hospital about? It's for the greater good, society. You know, there are big responsibilities there. It's serious stuff. And I think that probably satisfied my slightly Scots background. This has got to be serious.
Fast forward 12 months or so, you went to the BBC. Now, I remember when I first entered the BBC, it was a bit of a pinch me moment. I can't believe I'm working here. It's been the fabric of my viewing growing up. Was it the case for you? And how did that moment come about?
Well, I joined BBC Film Department, which in those days was largely based at what was called Television Film Studios, now Ealing Studios.
Yes.
And I thought three things about the BBC when I joined. The first is how military it was. The letters at that time that said, you will join, it's like, you know, are you actually in the Navy now? Second, the person who was the main training manager and the training I and my immediate colleagues had was superb. The training manager had a quiff, teddy boy trousers. He looked everything the BBC you might think wouldn't be. He was a brilliant communicator. And the biggest thing of all I remember about that time is a colleague of mine saying, I've got a stupid question. And he, okay, I'll mention his name, Ron Watley, said, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'd gone through university, I'd gone through primary and secondary education. I'd never heard that. But here it was, in a shaky wooden hut in television film studios in Ealing.
Yeah.
It was mystical. It was wonderful.
That was a time where there were only 4 channels or so. And as I understand it, the BBC was not one that you were frequently tuning into.
Well, I wasn't really tuning into television at all much until I joined the BBC because I loved radio, sound radio. I thought, and I still do, I think it's a place of great poetry. I loved the cinema. So my idea of a good time visually would be not necessarily to get to a widescreen experience, but to go to a cinema. So I remember seeing about 2 or 3 programs as a kid, and I realized I was meant to like them. I mean, my parents didn't have television. They whatever, didn't have it. And so, and I realized that my mates seemed to know about things I didn't because they had seen the same program. But the program seemed rather grey and ill-focused. And then one of these friends said, my dad's just built a television receiver. And that was wonderful because no cover, took the cover off. This thing was straight out of a sort of German film from the 1930s. Lights, wires, and people saying, don't touch that, you die.
You clearly had a sharp eye from the very beginning. And let's keep talking about grand productions. You know, putting aside cinema, you went on to work on some iconic productions like Horizon, Civilization. For people who don't know how influential, how central they were at the time, just explain that to us.
Well, I think pure luck, some wonderful spirit said, Jeremy Barr, you will join Alan Trainor, who is the main editor of Civilization. And he was the best tutor I could have. I think it was a 13-part series. Everything at the BBC seemed to be 13 parts in the time. And when you join something which is already running, huge team, everyone knows what they're doing, you better be good at working with that. But how difficult it is to make a series like that. And of course, in those times, they were only encompassing a part of world cultures. So much was being left out. Second, to be left in a dubbing theatre for an hour with Kenneth Clarke because something had gone wrong with the projection. So it was a marvellous moment, actually, because I think it was the final programme. And on the screen, what should have been a beautiful edit involved a German dive bomber coming down on Rodin's image And it wasn't meant to be that way at all. So I was left to make sure he had the BBC cup of coffee, and we talked. And I realised this man who actually was so decent, so unpompous. The other glory, of course, which sounds strange to people now, it was Civilization was shot on 35mm film in proper colour. And so learning how Britain was handling all the issues that go in with film technology in terms of colour, and the expense, and therefore the responsibility of getting it right. And the glory is of then making contacts with the main laboratories. Because, of course, in film, it's not just the camera person, it's the people who actually create the magic with that exposed emulsion. And realising, because they were often very embedded in their views about, and they weren't particularly friendly to new people who were very young. So you had to work your way in, whether it was K-film laboratories or rank film laboratories, and also the politics of all these companies. And I realised it was like a sort of Italian movie. They were all like sort of versions of the mafia. And I realised too that if you didn't, not ingratiate, but show you could do what you were doing, you were going to get shown the door very quickly.
You're clearly so dedicated from a very young age in the industry, and no surprise that very soon afterwards you got an epic project which quite literally took you to greater heights. You were focused on the lunar landings. Tell us about how that role came about.
Oh, Apollo 11.
Yes.
Well, again, I should make it grand, but actually I think it was a phone call that just came and said, as from next
you're
month,
so humble.
as from next month,
Just the phone call that
you're working on Apollo special project.
Yeah.
And I knew it was Apollo special project because immediately we had 6 telephone lines in our room. Now, in the BBC at that time, 6 telephone lines installed was somebody thinks this is big stuff. And also because I think somebody thought you'd be good at this, because I loved aviation. Ships, yes, but I'm fascinated by aviation, aircraft, rocketry. But again, the big thing was the politics, because Apollo 11 was fundamentally United States involving itself in a Cold War competition with the then Soviet Union. And anything about that era did have a very strong cast. I mean, from the BBC point of view, we were fortunate. We were given access to so much NASA film material just because we were, but at the same time, balance. Are we just showing all the American side?
Yeah.
Is there any other side? And on the day before the actual moon landing, there was a belief that actually the Soviet Union, the Russians, had got there first. There was a real panic. What they had landed was a mechanical robot device which crawled around a bit of the lunar surface. But I can tell you that for about 5 hours in BBC Television Centre, you could see flames in every direction, because this is going to not be the programme we thought we were making.
And let me just stress, this was something that the BBC had never faced before, this extent of coverage. We're talking almost 30 hours of coverage over a very short period.
Oh, yes. And I remember the day after the landing, gathering in the hospitality area, which seemed to be largely metal walls. And then controller of BBC One, I think, coming in saying, they like it, so you're going 24 hours.
Yeah.
Then he went. And we were going, so tired already. We've been working flat out on this. And yet at the same time to find yourself working with some of the intriguing people who are around, I mean, including not BBC staff, Patrick Moore, who becomes quite famous with the Sky at Night and all the rest, who would always say, I'm just coming here for a bit to help out. I've got other jobs to do. And people who would wake up at 3 a.m, having been queued too late, and if the viewer was stewed, they notice this person is just coming away to actually do their piece. But it really was grueling, exciting and amazing.
I mean, you mentioned Patrick Moore there. You also worked with Cliff Michael Moore,
Oh,
James
yes.
Burke. I mean,
Yes.
what was it like working with
Well,
all these
James Burke I'd met
characters?
before
Yeah.
on a Tomorrow's World. In fact, my first film I actually put together was, guess what? About ships. It was about taking an ocean tanker I mean, the shot material had been pre-shot. Take it apart, drop in a new section, weld it all back together again. 4 minutes. Is that exciting? Well, yes, I thought, I'm going to show off how many sound effects we can have in this. And James Burke happened to wander in. He said we got on very well because he had this very relaxed style. And so I felt I knew him immediately. And I actually liked the man a lot. And I think history is somewhat underrated, the quality of some of the programmes that he fronted.
You've clearly met so many characters during your time working at the BBC and beyond. I do want to focus for a bit longer on that Apollo landing because it was the first time the BBC had broadcast continuously overnight. Let's take a look back at some of that coverage with commentary from the BBC's James Burke.
Okay, Houston, I'm going to change lenses on you. Roger, Neil.
There, a moment while Neil Armstrong changes the lens on the television camera to a wide-angle lens that, when he takes it out to its distant position, we'll get a wide view of everything that's going on. That's what's happening now. He's changing the lens. The camera's moving.
I'd say we were focusing down to probably, about 8 inches to a foot behind the position of his hand when he was pulling out the cable.
Armstrong now must have the camera in his hand. And there, the first view of the lunar surface as he carries the camera out to about 30 feet away from the lunar module. And we've just heard that all over the world there are 33 countries who have stayed up to take these pictures live. It does look as if one of them is photographing the other by the flag.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. That would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are.
32 minutes past the hour.
Fine grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the limb. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
A taste of some of the coverage there. What's your reaction looking back at that? You were a part of that coverage.
And I still find it amazing. And I hope anyone now will go straight to the Science Museum and look at the kind of technology those people were travelling in, and then think about the technology that surrounded it. Because it's a bit of tinfoil for the computing power that people would now laugh at. And the other thing is the engineers in the BBC who said, we've no idea where this link will work. And I thought, this is tremendous. This is the first time I met a BBC engineer who has no idea whether something will work.
Yeah.
And that sense of being on the edge of adventure, exploration, technology was something I will never forget. And it was a privilege to be part of that.
You put it so well there, Jeremy. Let's focus on the next chapter. We are going to touch on your teaching, which has played a massive part in your career. But just before we come to that, you did go on to work outside of the BBC with a range of companies, both internationally and domestically and regionally. Yorkshire TV, Canada Broadcasting. Talk me through some of the roles you took on there.
Well, with Yorkshire Television, I was working actually in London rather than Leeds. Yorkshire Television was set up to be a new station in that part of the north of England. So taking on, I'm sorry, Granada, to taking on the big Granada.
People won't actually understand how TV was franchised.
No, I know. And all these companies were fighting for space. And the way Yorkshire Television was saying, no, we can be the broadcaster. And I know that Granada Television didn't like it at all.
Yeah, and then you went to Canada.
Yes, well, Canada was glorious because Vancouver, who wouldn't like Vancouver at that time? And it was a chance to work in cable television. But actually, the link to that is through Greenwich, because Greenwich had one of the earliest cable TV stations because of the issues about signal relay, given the topography of the Thames of the Greenwich area. So I met the chief engineer, Dave Liddell, and he said, you might want to go to Canada. It was great because I worked for Channel 10, and there's a lot of competition between the channels, and the station manager was straight out of uber US. He wore check trousers, and he said, where did you work? And I said, the BBC, and he came out with a string of 4-letter words. Now, he wasn't being rude about the BBC. I know what he said, you think it'll be like that here. And of course it wasn't because there were about 14 of us doing everything.
Yes,
that was a great education. Yeah. You can do this, you can do that, because you have to. And we had, every week, we didn't make it, we had the rights to show ice hockey. So, in that day or that moment, we were the leading channel people were watching at that time, because ice hockey is it, or certainly was, in Canada. And then I had a chance to spend a little time in a station in Calgary. Completely different. There were 2 stations. One was a sort of open access, just come along, take the equipment, do what you like. Tended not to produce very good results. The other was, no, we're doing it like the BBC would do it rather than Channel 10. But what was fascinating, actually, in that channel is they developed a current affairs program I'm not sure I've ever seen in this country. Maybe it couldn't happen that way. So the idea was you start off with a panel discussion, the kind we're all very used to. But if somebody viewing it says, I don't agree with that opinion, no, that person's out of... They call up, and the station did, yes, and the person who's there had to go off.
Right.
So you have a constant rolling program. And, of course, it's very attractive to some people. And
I think they call that real-time news now, don't they?
Well, they should, because and you had really rumbustious conversations taking place, but also to experience the different cultures, not just Canadian culture, but different cultures between BC, Vancouver, and Alberta, the way people saw the world.
Talking of different cultures, you also dabbled with the kind of big corporations like Disney, like Sony. Yes. What was that like, especially when you look at a kind of national broadcaster like the BBC?
Well, working for Sony, I was a consultant at one point, a bit later on, and my task was to help work out why somebody designed a piece of equipment the way they had, because the team in Japan had long moved on 3 generations, but they were trying to sell this particular hardware to the, as they saw, opening market in Africa. So suddenly we're going to sell all this stuff. And maybe there's a moral issue there, but also how do we explain to people using this why it works the way it works?
We're going to move on to something that I know you've wanted to talk about from the very beginning. You're teaching at Ravensbourne University. Tell us how that came about.
I'm so lucky that so many people have put up with my teaching. They're called students because the nicest thing I think I've ever heard about my teaching was from a student who said, we come to your lectures because we never quite know where it's going. And I said, oh, you got it, because in my mind it should be like driving around across the Alps, endless, going around corners. Can you do this? Can you make that turn? And by that I don't mean something conceited about my ego. It's just, if we're involved in listening and interacting with people, our mind should be caught with the idea that nothing is going to be quite so straightforward as you might think. But I want to pay a particular tribute, if I got to my first moment, because it wasn't actually formally. I was invited to come and talk to a group of students from the BBC. And it was a shaky wooden hut somewhere in Bromley North. And I was led into this room with these 20 minds looking at me. And the man who brought me in, it was a man, he just said, now I have to go. And I thought, I know he's going to get in his car and drive off the site. It's Friday afternoon. Why would he stay? So I said to the students, what do you want to know? And they said, well, what about how television works?
That's a good start.
So in the days of chalk and boards, I actually drew endless diagrams about signal paths and how one thing connects to the other, and how from the camera to the... But the bit that really fascinated me It was their desire to learn, and there were people there who did not have lots of A-levels in, but they were really enthusiastic. And then there were other people who'd tried other careers. There was later on I met somebody who'd spent 2 years studying dentistry. Thought, no, I don't want to be a dentist. And another person who'd been a helicopter pilot working in the oil industry. Drawn to, no, I want to work in this, and I want to find a way of working in this business. So I thought the best thing we can all learn is how do you really work with other people and communicate with them, because we can all sit in a little box in Bromley, but who's going to know anything about that? So first thing is, who can use the telephone? Who can actually speak to people they've not met before? Who can persuade people they don't know? And that was always been my idea. We can do almost anything, because there's one thing we've got. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the students. We're new talent. And if ever there's been a need in an industry, it's for new talent. And you never know who you might find, whether it's production, post-production, people who just suddenly blossom because they've got this particular innate skill of understanding.
Yeah, and some of those students who you interacted with, we can see on the screen now as well, clearly inspired by your work, because you went on to become a course leader at the university.
Well, I'm very lucky. It was actually at the time he would have been called the principal, then became the director. They'd now be called the vice-chancellor. The students had gone on strike, and I'd been in hospital for an operation, came back, and he said, "Can you sort out the strike?" I was the only member of staff who hadn't been there when they went on strike. And I'm really glad, I hope you give me a second to talk about this, because for a week I sat in a room with people who started off being so angry, and I knew the only thing I could do was just to listen. And by the third day, we were all agreeing there was something we might do together. Guess what we could do? We could make a film. And it was that process, and I was appalled, not with the students, but how angry they'd become. But
I'm hearing an empathetic engineer.
Well, I think empathy is crucial to the way we should relate to each other, and also the way we should manage courses. And I'm glad to say I've met or had the privilege of recruiting several members of staff who seem to have understood it is empathy. It is not you go in and shout at people and you menace them. And you work with them.
And a thirst from the students to learn. And you were teaching at a key time for the industry, when the industry was moving from analogue to digital. How did you communicate that?
Well, that's the bit I loved, the fact it was continuous movement. I mean, there were the stages in analogue and the stages in dialogue. And the glory is nothing seemed to sit still for more than about 6 months. Because high-definition television, are we teaching this? Do we know what it is? Does the industry know what it is? And the industry was forever changing its ideas about specifications. So what do you do about that? Well, you have to have the chance to go to companies and talk, persuade people in, and also go out and about to where industry might have its big meetings. And for me, places like, International Broadcasting Convention became later much more important. You need to get out, but not just me, you want the students to get out and meet people on stands and hear what they are saying. But it was serious stuff, because networking is serious stuff. Timing is absolutely serious stuff. You cannot fail. And also differences of practice between ITV and the BBC.
Yeah.
Because the BBC were always, in many ways, very good to us, but they couldn't fund us because of the licence fee limitations. So it was largely relying on former colleagues and other people, whereas ITV, I think, began to think, do you know, this Ravensbourne can start to become the equivalent of the BBC's Evesham in terms of training.
Well, clearly you tapped into your extensive network to take the university to greater heights, internationally as well.
Well, yes, because where are you going to go if you don't go international? I mean, what world is this if you try and sit in a little cloister? And I mean, I don't know where it started, but it probably started in a totally non-televisual fashion. The fact that I'd spent a little bit of time in France, in Paris in particular. It probably starts actually with a French girlfriend who forced me to speak reasonably adequate French. But what I loved is the fact that the French political scenario was rather different. Technically, the French insisted in the way that they said, we're going to develop our own technology. So when it comes to colour television, well, you can have PAL and go with the Germans, but we're going to have this CCAM, and we're going to sell it to the Chinese. And the politics of that, suddenly, I found interesting. I know it must sound very nerdy, but...
You were the only university to be invited to the European Broadcasting Union Conference as well.
We were, and that was glorious. I mean, I'm sorry, if there's a moment you kind of go, how rarely, it's because we are there. The politics of the EBU is really interesting. You don't realise it till you're part of it. And this particular conference was in Madrid, and such a great opportunity to build links with different countries. But you need those collaborations and that willingness to talk to each other. And for students, they're going to work, they were working in an international world, not just in Europe, but across the world, because the knowledge they have, their understanding of the relevant technologies and processes is sellable anywhere. And I'm so excited by some of the people I know who've gone to other places and really have been... Everything they might want and feature was not sitting and growing up in South London. It was actually in that part of the Far East or wherever where they have been able to build a relationship.
Another key success was being inducted into what's now known as the International Moving Image Society.
Well, it was a smaller organisation in its early days, and a really heavy title, the British Kinematograph, Sound and Television Society. But yes, and then, Jeremy, you know about training, so would you chair this committee? And then this committee is going to go into a political world called validation wars, because who are you going to go head-to-head with? By this time, Britain had grown crazily, and vast number of courses said they were educating people in training and film and television. But I have a feeling, which I'm sure will be an arrow somewhere waiting for me, it was going out of control completely. And Ravensbourne must fight hard to be seen as a place that was involved early on, offering great opportunities, and still not afraid to try things new. And again, I'm very excited by the number of people who've graduated from Ravensbourne from different courses, from diploma courses to foundation courses to degree courses, who've gone off and have really been part of that news gathering.
That leads me on to my next question about some of your most memorable, most successful students.
It's a wonderful question, because I would be hard put to, but I'll mention a group, but it's not news gathering. It was a group of people. They were studying on HND, and they won a contract from the West London Health Authority to make a program about the learning needs of people who may not understand the physical practicalities of sexual relationships. Now, I'm mentioning this because there were people in this college earlier days said, don't touch it, it'll go wrong, the press will get it, it'll all be misrepresented. But the students, that's my point, were absolutely ace at this and worked together as a group of 20 people. We had to do most of the shooting on Sundays in a closed set, so no one misconstrued anything of what was going on in the images. But what I loved is they really addressed this issue, which I would argue in some ways is one of the biggest issues in society. They didn't want something glamorous involving wine bars and loud music. They wanted something that, and I really respect where those students have subsequently gone. And I've not caught up with as many of them as I'd like, but I know some that went to Soho facilities. And so that was a group thing. And then there are individuals who you think, well, there's a person sadly now deceased who became quite a good director, But I was very proud of him the day he directed a drama for the BBC about 2 American Air Force pilots in F-111 who were going mad. And then there were other people who just went in the world of music videos. And probably Tim Pope is the one I would, because if ever there's a person who said, no one's going to really take me seriously, but he just worked for a company, borrowed the camera the weekend, starting shooting gigs, and on that basis really flew, but always with his own ideas, and that led to making, feature film and other things.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you is that you have had such a vivid career, and those memories are still so alive in your mind right now, and that's wonderful to hear. But now is your time for a bit of rest, because you have retired. You retired just before the pandemic, but you still describe yourself as still thinking and still working. What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm not retired. I mean, you're right. I mean, the university is very clever. They very kindly gave me this honorific, which means, would you get out of the building? On the other hand, would you come in occasionally? And I have a great deal of respect for some of the changes, because there's work to be done. And heavens, I'd be pompous if I said I have much of a role, but maybe in a small way occasionally I can try and encourage that work, because there's something about Ravensbourne that's still in me and always will be, and I don't know why. I think going off and having other jobs, trying other things, kept me going to want to come back. And I'm very lucky. How many places would actually invite you back to come?
You have so much wisdom to share.
Yes.
That it does not surprise me, and I do want to tap into that wisdom as well, because if I was to give you a crystal ball right now and ask you to look into the future of the industry, we've got social media on one hand, we've got AI doing wondrous things on the other. Where do you see the industry heading in terms of technology and the kind of messages to students now?
I think it comes back to people, frankly, and people and their ethics. Do they know what it is they are doing? AI, I think, might metamorphose quite quickly into something which will be extraordinary, but not as we think about it. I remember 20 years ago, a senior person in the States, Sun Systems, saying, we're only 5 years away from the Terminator world. And by that he meant the War of the Machines. And I think we're a little more wise, but not that much. Because of my aviation interests, I still go with one or two friends to things like the Farnborough Aviation, and I saw the rise of the drones, from little things that people just say, oh, that won't work, to a world now which is fearsome in what it can do. So I'm not suggesting every broadcaster gets hold of their own drones. I think you come back to not simply the people who make, but the people who choose to, well, shall we use that word, consume, or just enjoy? What is it I'm making this for? How am I trying to share this? And that's where, as industry has conglomerated into quite a small number of big things, I think some of the most interesting things are happening where people disperse, pull back, and sit in communities which can be really interesting now, because, of course, they're not defined by geography or necessarily by culture, about the way we might do things. And I think fundamentally, in the industry, in whatever form we are talking about it, however big or small, it will come down to the human chemistry between people who can, above all, trust each other.
Which leads me to my final question, because as the technology changes, so does viewing habits. So what advice would you give to a person wanting to enter the world of TV right now, when we are looking at people engaging more on YouTube and elsewhere? What would you say to them?
I would hope first they believe in their own ideas. There is a huge value in marketing, but there's a huge question mark about believing you might be able to identify who really might be excited by your thinking. And I think the history of communication, again and again, has shown that people who thought, this is it, this is what everyone wants to see, wants actually, yes, initially, but not for long. Go back to Apollo 11, Apollo 12, the audience numbers begin to sink. Because it's boring, isn't it? We've seen people go to the moon and back. Apollo 13, somebody might die, they might not return. The numbers shot up. So what's that tell us about human interest? It's about the story we're sharing, about how people choose to see the world. And I think that's where, if you know what, for students I always said, I want to tell my story, but do you know what the story is you're really trying to tell?
We will close with that message, believe in your ideas. Jeremy Barr, thank you for joining us here on AndQ. An absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for giving me some time. I really appreciate it.